I'm Misha here, and this time, for a Star Wars video, let's talk about what was one of my favorite craft when I was a kid. I always just had a soft spot for the Rebel snowspeeder. I don't know. This was created originally, at least what it was based on, the T-47 light airspeeder was created by Incom. And if you recognize that name, it's because they also made the X-Wing as well as the ARC 170 from the Clone Wars period, and the V-Wing, the U-Wing, and several others. And we have two little die-cast toys or models or figurines here. This is an earlier one from the Titanium series. And this is a more recent one from the Hot Wheels series. Yeah, the T-47 airspeeder was originally designed to be a cargo management unit, cargo transport. Essentially, it would lock on to cargo containers that had repulsor lifts and move them around. It would use its kind of electronic or, I don't know, harpoon and tow cable to latch on and drag them around. When in its original mode, it had a pilot, and then the rear guy was considered a cargo management officer. And at this point, it didn't have lasers, and it wasn't really armored because this wasn't a combat craft. But the Rebels, being ingenuitive, would take these because they could get their hands on them. One thing that they were good for, they were quite inexpensive, about 18,000 credits. And they would fit them with two heavy laser cannon up front, and in the back they would either continue with the harpoon tow cable, or they would install a rapid fire blaster and a swiveling turret, making the backseater into a gunner instead of being a cargo management. They would also add armor. You know the Rebel Y-Wing, how it's missing a lot of its armor plating? Well, the Rebel airspeeder here is where that went. They took a lot of components from the Y-Wing, including some cockpit instrumentation, but a lot of the armor, and they slapped it on the D's to kind of make them more combat capable. And that's good because they were not shielded. And we know that the Resistance, or I should say, what they call them, the Insurgents, had a few of these T-47s that they used on Jeddah. That was before the construction of the Death Star was complete. And we also knew that the Rebels were using these on Dantooine, which was their base before Yavin. And after Yavin, when they relocated to Hoth, that's when we get the Snow Speeder variant here, which they had to modify to work in the cold. They would add heaters to the engine components, and they would add various de-icing equipment, bits and bobs, to keep things from icing up, because yeah, Hoth was really cold and really icy. They would also modify them in a few other ways for the environment, and it took them a little time to get them working properly. And they would use the T-47 as a patrol craft, a search and rescue craft, as we saw, to some extent a reconnaissance craft, and they would use it for air-to-surface attack, say against troops or probes or walkers, and some limited air-to-air engagement capability. So aside from price, what really kind of made this attractive to the Rebels? Well, originally these were capable of about 650 kilometers per hour, but when the engines were upgraded and things were shifted around a bit, they were able to get up to 1100 kilometers per hour. And this is pretty fast for the Star Wars universe, not for ours, but for theirs. That's getting up to be faster than things like the Y-Wing, and kind of in there with things like the X-Wing and TIE Fighter. And they were small, just over 5 meters tip to tip, and they're relatively thin. And for what they were, reasonably maneuverable, but because they were a heavily refit cargo management airspeeder, they weren't the easiest or most enjoyable to fly, at least according to many Rebel pilots. Nevertheless, they did serve many roles and were a useful asset to the rebellion. On Hoth, they used their tow cables, as you famously know, to take down walkers. More importantly, they were able to basically just delay the walkers from getting to the shield generator, allowing more transports to escape and thus more of the rebellion to live. Even though the snow speeders, most of them were destroyed, and the ones that weren't had to be left behind because this was not a spacecraft. In fact, it had a maximum altitude of about 175 meters. So it was, definitely kind of hugging the Earth, relatively low altitude. And they weren't just on Hoth, they were used on many other Rebel installations for defense and patrol. And they were even deployed a few times for hit and run, where they would be launched from either bases on the same planet as Imperials or from kind of a mothership that would come down. And they would survive through the rebellion and even enter into New Republic service. And just like they modified some to be snow speeders, other T-47s were modified to be sand speeders for the desert. Those were modified for cooling and filtering for the engines to deal with the sand. There were also versions modified for swamp speeders that were kind of more proofed against moisture and corrosion. And there were even a few that were modified for operating in higher altitudes or in a vacuum with more of an airtight canopy cockpit. So yeah, it was a versatile little craft for the rebellion. And again, I just always kind of liked it. Small and neat. I think as a kid I just liked that they had 2 crew back to back. And it definitely harkens to other Incom designs, especially the canopy. Very simple and sleek. Originally, in the production notes for Empire Strikes Back, they considered building these as kind of kit bashes of X-Wing and Y-Wing components to really give it that slapped-together look for the rebellion. But in the end, they went with the new design. And I think we're all kind of happy that they did. Boop. So what about the Hot Wheels versus the titanium? Well, the Hot Wheels, like most of theirs, this comes with the earlier flight stand. You can put your finger in it. Later they would go away from these to just standard stands. It has the typical screw holes. It's very solid. Pretty much all metal except for these guns. It's a pretty good size for what it is. But the earlier titanium here is clearly a more interesting little die-cast ship. And to be fair, it is a little smaller, I believe. Yeah, just a little bit than the Hot Wheels. But 10, 15% at most. On the other hand, it has kind of more elegant angles here. These are thinner. It's kind of nice. It has screw holes in the bottom, but they're a little less obvious. Also, it has a landing skid. That's good for having the skid. It's kind of nice to have it, just because. But unfortunately, with all theirs, the skids don't fold up all the way, so they do stick out. So it's kind of a give and take there with those. Also, the canopy opens on these. Pretty basic cockpit inside, but it does show you the double seats. Nice. And the air brakes open. They do open all the way, but I'm not going to do it because one problem, in fact mine here came with one of them loose in the package, the hinges are kind of weak on these. The good news is that they come off, you just pop them back on, but I've got them on, they're staying, so I want to pop them up again and risk it. And of course the downside to that is there is a little bit of a lip for the canopy in these for you to use them. So some might like the cleaner look of the Hot Wheels without having the lips here, but it's just a little bit lighter weight. Still metal, but this just feels a little heavier, and I like the paint they use. It's more of a matte feeling paint, whereas this is a shinier feel. So there's definite pros and cons, but the titanium overall just seems a little higher quality. These early titaniums usually had an action feature of some type, a moving part or something. Later on the line, they kind of got away from that. So yeah, the snow speeder, the Incom T-47. What do you think? Did you like this one when you first... Yeah, I knew that was going to happen. It stands up okay normally, but on this carpet, it likes to go thump. Yeah, do you like these, or... I mean, it's definitely a very 80s design, I'll give it that. It definitely is a product of its time. No arguments. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.